What is the most fought-over fort in Texas? Most people would probably answer the Alamo, and most people would be wrong. South and east of San Antonio lies the town of Goliad, home to the Presidio La Bahía. Unlike the more famous Alamo, the Presidio at La Bahía was built solely with military intentions. A good thing, since just about every conflict, rebellion, or outright revolution involving Texas and Texians wound up being fought outside its walls. Come with me on a trek to Goliad, Texas, and the Presidio La Bahía. The Presidio was built by the Spanish in 1747 to protect settlers traveling on the Texas Coast Road. Today, the Presidio houses a functioning chapel, a museum, reenactments, and living history events. Visitors to the fortress will see a curtain wall enclosing a parade ground, the quadrangle, which in 1836 was filled with the tents of Texian troops. One wall was devoted to a small barracks. A second was devoted to officer quarters, storage, and the services needed to supply a military garrison. Our Lady of Loretto, the Presidio's chapel, has been hosting continuous Catholic services since the Presidio was founded. The chapel has its own enclosed courtyard, and it is in this courtyard that the quarters are located, a suite of rooms that can be rented for overnight visits, rooms with thick stone walls, rustic furniture, and with a window that looks out onto the chapel's courtyard, the site of death and murder on a large scale. It is this suite of rooms that offers a historically minded trekker the ability, once the sun goes down and the museum closes, to wander the empty quadrangle and commune with the ghosts of ages past. Step outside the museum's doors, and one of the first things you will see is a reminder of the Presidio's role in rebellion and revolution, a simple gravestone. The stone is for a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, Augustus McGee, who was a leader of a motley band of desperados, adventurers, and rebels against the Spanish. McGee's forces seized the fortress at Goliad, before McGee died of disease, suicide, or being poisoned. It depends on the source you believe. That first attempt at a Texas republic was slapped down by the Spanish crown. No trek to La Bahía is complete without first stopping at a lonely pasture about 15 miles from the fort. A pasture where the true story of the Goliad Massacre begins. The conflict that took place here was known as the Battle of Coleto Creek. To understand the significance of this barren field, one must know the story of Colonel James Fannin and his ill-fated command. In the chaotic Texas Revolution of 1836, Fannin, leading a contingent of almost 350 Texian rebels, was a man plagued by indecision. He failed to move to relieve the siege of the Alamo until it was too late, only to decide to abandon the walls of the Presidio in favor of moving closer to the Texian settlements east of Victoria. His delayed retreat was cut off by Mexican dragoons and ended in a bloody siege on this open prairie. This field, now a silent testament to their sacrifice, marks the spot where Fannin and his men made their final stand. Today, the spot where the Texans under Fannin formed up in a tight square, a formation more reminiscent of Napoleonic battlefields in Europe, is marked by a rusting piece of farm equipment, planted by the former owner of this land. It was here, surrounded by Mexican infantry, dragoons, and artillery, with nowhere to hide, that Fannin decided to offer an honorable surrender. It was accepted, and the men were led back to Goliad and the Presidio La Bahía to await the decision of Santa Anna. What will be done with these 300 rebellious Texians? On Palm Sunday, March 27, 1836, the prisoners were marched in 3 columns into the Texas countryside. Less than a mile away from the fortress, the Mexican soldiers halted the columns, and then they opened fire on the unarmed prisoners. Today, those 3 sites aren't even marked by a roadside historical plaque. It takes some research and some Google Map searching, and no small amount of guesswork, to pinpoint the approximate locations where historians and archaeologists suspect each column faced the rifles of their executioners. Today they're just fields, forgotten, unmarked, unsung. In a way, they must appear almost as they did in 1836, when the men under Fannin's command were murdered along the road. For them, the horror of Goliad was over. For the 40 Texians who had been wounded at the Battle of Coleto Creek and were unable to walk, left in the small confines of the Presidio's chapel, the horror of that Palm Sunday had yet to begin. One by one, or in small groups, they were led into the small enclosed area in front of the chapel doors and executed. At night, the area is lit by an orange floodlight, and when you're staying in the quarters and have the whole compound to yourself, it's all too easy to imagine the ghost of that Palm Sunday still waiting in that courtyard. The man who was arguably most responsible for their presence in that courtyard was executed last. He was led out into the courtyard and seated near the water gate. Not quite 200 years later, I walked out into that courtyard, sat near the water gate, and was blindfolded. I wanted to see if perhaps I could have some sense of what it was like to be Colonel Fannin in that moment. The moment the blindfold covered my eyes, I felt a chill that needed no supernatural cause. Today, the victims of the Goliad Massacre lie under a stone monument outside the walls of the fort. In a way, the Texas Revolution never ended for them. They've never left their posts. Like so many others, I left my name and stories in the quarter's guest book when I left. I read through them, seeing encounters with wailing spirits, mysterious cannon blasts, and shaking doors. I could only add that I had spent a long night within the walls of La Bahía.